Your breath moves without permission. In, out. A rhythm older than thought, older than the story you've been telling about who you are. Right now, in this moment, something is breathing you. Not the other way around. And beneath that breath, beneath the automatic inhale and exhale, there is a question forming. Not in words yet. Deeper than language. It moves like a shadow across still water. What if everything you believe about yourself is false? Not partially wrong. Not slightly mistaken. Completely, utterly, devastatingly false. The person you present to the world each morning, the competent one, the struggling one, the confident mask, or the anxious performance. What if that entire construction is nothing more than elaborate fiction? A story so convincing you forgot you were the author. Before you dismiss this as philosophical abstraction, feel into your body right now. Notice the subtle tension in your jaw. The way your shoulders carry invisible weight. The low-frequency hum of vigilance that never quite stops. Your nervous system knows something your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. You are exhausted from being someone. And if you're still here, still listening, it's because some part of you, the part that exists before the performance begins, recognizes this truth. That part doesn't need convincing. It's been waiting for you to stop long enough to hear it. What I'm about to share isn't comfort. It isn't reassurance that you're fine exactly as you are. It's an invitation to see what Carl Jung spent his lifetime mapping. The architecture of your own psyche, the parts you've exiled into darkness, and the shocking revelation that your wholeness depends on welcoming back what you've spent decades rejecting. If this resonates, if something in you says yes finally, subscribe now. Not because you need more content, but because you're ready to stop performing and start recognizing. This channel exists for those willing to look directly at what they've been avoiding. The threshold is here. You're standing on it. What happens next requires only one thing. Your willingness to see. Before language, before the word I had any meaning, you existed as pure responsiveness. A newborn doesn't know separation. There is no boundary between self and world, no division between inner and outer. There is only sensation, the warmth of skin against skin, the cold shock of absence, the flooding relief of return. This is your original nature, undefended, unfiltered, completely present. Then something shifts. The infant cries from hunger, from discomfort, from the primal need for contact. Sometimes the world responds with warmth. Sometimes it responds with coldness. Sometimes it doesn't respond at all. And in those moments, those crucial formative moments, your nervous system begins its most important work, learning which parts of you are safe to express and which parts threaten your survival. When you expressed rage and the room went silent, your body registered danger. When you expressed compliance and received approval, your body registered safety. When you showed vulnerability and met with impatience, your body registered abandon this immediately. You didn't think these thoughts. You were too young for thinking. But your organism learned. It learned with the precision of a creature whose life depends on reading the environment correctly. And it began the process of division, acceptable self versus unacceptable self. The parts that ensure connection versus the parts that risk abandonment. This is not pathology. This is survival intelligence. The child who learns to suppress their anger in a household where rage is dangerous isn't weak. They're adapting brilliantly to their circumstances. The young person who learns to hide their authentic desires in an environment that punishes deviation isn't broken. They're responding to real threat with real strategy. Carl Jung called this construction the persona. The word comes from the Latin for mask, but Jung understood something crucial. This mask isn't a lie you tell others. It's a necessary interface between your raw, unfiltered nature and a world that cannot hold all of you at once. Your persona saved you. It allowed you to navigate family systems, social hierarchies, cultural expectations. It gave you a way to belong when belonging meant survival. The competent professional, the good child, the strong one who never needs help, the agreeable one who never makes waves. These aren't false selves. They're adaptive strategies that worked. But here's what happens over time. The mask that once protected you begins to imprison you. The persona that allowed you to survive childhood becomes the cage that prevents you from living fully as an adult. Because while you were busy perfecting the acceptable version of yourself, something else was happening in the darkness. Everything you rejected didn't disappear. The anger you learned to swallow didn't evaporate. It sank into your body, crystallized in your tissues, became the chronic tension in your neck and the grinding of your teeth at night. The desire you were taught to shame didn't vanish. It went underground, emerging as compulsion, as addiction, as the thing you do when no one is watching. The grief you weren't allowed to express didn't heal. It became the heaviness you wake with, the inexplicable sadness that colors everything gray. Jung called this the shadow, the repository of everything you decided was too dangerous, too shameful, too unacceptable to remain conscious. It's not evil. It's not pathological. It's simply the parts of your wholeness that you exiled in order to survive. And it is alive. Think about the last time you had a disproportionate reaction to something small. Your partner left dishes in the sink, and you felt volcanic rage. A colleague took credit for your idea, and you fantasized about their destruction. Someone cut you off in traffic, and you wanted violence. These aren't character flaws. They're eruptions from the shadow, moments when the pressure of what you've been suppressing becomes too great and breaks through your carefully maintained surface. The intensity of your reaction is proportional not to the trigger, but to how much energy you've been using to keep that part of yourself locked away. Consider the person who prides themselves on being endlessly patient and accommodating. They never say no. They never express frustration. They're the one everyone can count on, the one who never complains. And then one day, seemingly without warning, they explode. Or they collapse. Or they simply disappear, leaving everyone confused. But they seem so happy. They never said anything was wrong. This is the cost of the persona without shadow integration. The young professional who presents as confident and capable while secretly battling crippling self-doubt. The parent who shows only strength while drowning in fear that they're failing their children. The spiritual seeker who speaks of love and light while harboring deep wells of judgment and contempt. The activist who fights for justice while unable to forgive their own family. These aren't hypocrites. These are human beings living the universal predicament. The exhausting maintenance of a partial self while the rest of you pounds on the walls of your consciousness, demanding recognition. You can feel it now, can't you? The weight of maintaining the performance. The vigilance required to monitor every word, every expression, every impulse before it reaches the surface. The constant calculation. Is this acceptable? Will this be received well? Does this fit the image I've constructed? It's like wearing armor that you can never remove. At first, it protected you. Now it's crushing you under its weight. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the performance, beneath the carefully curated version of yourself you present to the world, there is a question beginning to form. It's the same question that brought you here, the same question that made you stop scrolling and start listening. Who would I be if I stopped pretending? Not who should I be? Not who do others need me to be? But who actually exists beneath this elaborate construction? The answer to that question lives in the shadow, in the parts you rejected, in the qualities you judged as unacceptable, in the desires you learned to suppress, in the rage you swallowed, in the grief you postponed, in the wildness you tamed. Your wholeness isn't waiting in some future achievement or spiritual attainment. It's waiting in the darkness you've been running from. And you're beginning to feel the difference between the life you're performing and the life that wants to live through you. That feeling, that growing unease, that sense of something not quite right, that whisper that says, this isn't it. That's not depression. That's not anxiety. That's not failure. That's your shadow calling you home. The body keeps score. You wake with tension already present in your shoulders, as if you've been fighting battles in your sleep. Your jaw aches from clenching. There's a knot in your stomach that you've learned to call normal. A low hum of anxiety that never quite resolves, like tinnitus of the nervous system. Always there, just beneath your awareness. You've tried everything. Meditation apps, therapy, exercise, supplements, positive thinking, gratitude journals. And some of it helps, temporarily. But the underlying current remains. The sense that something is fundamentally wrong, that you're somehow failing at the basic task of being human. What if I told you these aren't symptoms of failure? What if these sensations, the chronic tension, the free-floating anxiety, the inexplicable sadness, the sense of living behind glass, are actually intelligent signals? Messages from the parts of you that refuse to be silenced, no matter how sophisticated your suppression strategies become. Your anxiety isn't random. It's the alarm system of a psyche that knows it's living a lie. When you present a false self to the world, when you perform a version of yourself that contradicts your actual nature, your nervous system registers the dissonance. It experiences this as threat, because at a deep, evolutionary level, being disconnected from your authentic self is dangerous. It means you're not responding to reality as it is. You're responding to reality as you've been conditioned to believe it should be. The person who learned to suppress their anger doesn't just lose access to rage. They lose access to healthy boundaries, to the ability to say no, to the protective force that keeps them from being exploited. And their body knows this. So it generates anxiety as a warning. You are not safe. You have no defenses. Danger is everywhere. The individual who was taught that their needs were burdensome doesn't just become self-sufficient. They become isolated, unable to ask for help, convinced that connection requires them to be perpetually useful to others. And their body registers this as abandonment. So it generates depression as a signal. You are alone. You are unsupported. Something is missing. These aren't chemical imbalances that appeared randomly. These are intelligent responses to the violence of self-abandonment. But here's where it gets more disturbing. The very qualities you rejected, the ones you decided were too dangerous, too shameful, too unacceptable, often contain your deepest power. The rage you suppressed holds your capacity for necessary boundaries. The greed you learned to shame contains your will to thrive, your refusal to settle for scraps. The desire you were taught to hide holds your authentic passion, your life force, your connection to what actually moves you. By rejecting these parts, you didn't eliminate them. You eliminated your access to the power they contain. And so you find yourself in the peculiar position of being exhausted by life, while simultaneously feeling like you're not really living. Tired but not fulfilled. Busy but not purposeful. Connected but profoundly lonely. Successful by external measures but hollow at the core. This is the paradox of the unintegrated shadow. The more you reject parts of yourself, the more energy you must expend maintaining the rejection. And that energy, that constant vigilance, that perpetual monitoring, that exhausting performance, is energy that could be used for actually living. Let me be more specific. You're in a meeting. Someone takes credit for your idea. You feel something rising, hot, sharp, demanding. But you've learned that anger is unprofessional, that speaking up is aggressive, that making waves threatens your position. So you swallow it. You smile. You say nothing. And the rage doesn't disappear. It goes into your body. Into your shoulders. Into your gut. Into the headache that will arrive later. Into the passive-aggressive comment you'll make tomorrow. Into the resentment that will poison your relationship with that colleague for months. This is the cost of rejecting your shadow. Or consider this. You see someone living with apparent freedom, traveling, creating, taking risks, refusing to conform. And you feel something visceral. Contempt. Judgment. They're irresponsible. They're selfish. They're not living in the real world. The intensity of your judgment is the measure of your own suppressed desire for freedom. You're not seeing them clearly. You're seeing your own rejected longing reflected back at you. This is projection, the shadow's favorite mechanism. Everything you cannot accept in yourself, you will see with exaggerated clarity in others. And you will judge it with the same harshness you've used to judge yourself. The person who is most offended by arrogance is often suppressing their own confidence. The one who rails against selfishness is often denying their own needs. The individual who judges others for being too emotional is often terrified of their own feelings. The activist who sees oppression everywhere may be unable to acknowledge their own desire for power. This isn't hypocrisy. This is the shadow operating through projection, showing you what you've disowned by making you see it everywhere else. And the exhaustion deepens, because now you're not just managing your own internal experience, you're managing your reactions to everyone around you, constantly triggered, constantly defending, constantly proving that you're not like them, that you're different, that you're on the right side of whatever division you've created. The world becomes a mirror reflecting back your own rejected parts, and you spend your life fighting the reflection instead of recognizing what it's showing you. This is why shadow work is so threatening. It's not just about acknowledging that you have flaws. It's about recognizing that the very things you've built your identity around rejecting, the qualities you pride yourself on not being, are actually alive within you. The anger you judge in others is your anger. The greed you condemn is your greed. The weakness you despise is your weakness. And this recognition, when it comes, feels like death. Because if you're not the person you've been pretending to be, then who are you? If the spiritual seeker discovers they're full of judgment, what happens to their spiritual identity? If the strong one admits they're terrified, what happens to their role as the one everyone depends on? If the rational person acknowledges their irrational desires, what happens to their sense of superiority? The persona doesn't want to die. It will fight for its survival with everything it has. It will generate anxiety to keep you from looking too closely. It will create depression to convince you that change is impossible. It will produce shame to make the shadow seem too terrible to approach. And so you remain stuck. exhausted by the performance but terrified of what lies beneath it. Knowing something must change, but unable to imagine what that change would look like. Sensing that the answer lives in the darkness, but convinced that the darkness will destroy you. This is the crisis point. The place where most people turn back. Where they double down on the persona, invest even more energy in the performance, seek out new strategies for managing the symptoms while avoiding the cause. But you're still here, still listening, which means some part of you is ready for what comes next. What if the darkness won't destroy you? What if it's been waiting to complete you? What if the answer you've been seeking through therapy, through meditation, through achievement, through relationships, through substances, through spirituality, what if it lives in the exact place you've been refusing to look? What if your wholeness depends on welcoming back what you've spent your entire life rejecting? The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your exiled self, pressing against the walls of your carefully constructed life, demanding recognition. And the pressure you feel, the anxiety, the depression, the exhaustion, the sense that something is profoundly wrong, that's not pathology. That's the sound of your wholeness trying to break through. There is a place within you that you've been avoiding your entire life. Not imagine this, recognize it. It's not metaphorical. It's not abstract. It's as real as the breath moving through your lungs right now. There is a chamber in your psyche where everything you rejected has been waiting. Not dormant. Not dead. Alive. Fermenting. Growing more potent with each year of denial. The shadow doesn't live in some mystical realm. It lives in your body. In the tension you carry. In the dreams that wake you at 3 a.m. In the sudden eruptions of emotion that seem to come from nowhere. In the patterns you repeat despite swearing you'll change. In the people you attract who somehow always trigger the same wounds. It wears a face. Sometimes many faces. There is the rage you've been swallowing since childhood. Not irritation, not frustration, but volcanic, destructive rage. The kind that wants to burn everything down. The kind that terrifies you with its intensity. You've kept it locked away because you were taught that anger makes you unlovable, that rage makes you dangerous, that expressing fury means losing control. But that rage is still there. It hasn't mellowed with time. It's been compressing, intensifying, waiting. There is the greed you learned to shame, the raw, animal hunger for more. More pleasure, more recognition, more power, more life. You were taught that wanting too much makes you selfish, that ambition makes you corrupt, that desire makes you base. So you learned to want modestly, to settle for less, to call your self-denial virtue. But the hunger remains. It gnaws at you in the quiet moments. It emerges as envy when you see others taking what they want. It becomes the resentment you feel toward those who refuse to diminish themselves. There is the lust you were taught to hide, not gentle desire, but raw, demanding, unapologetic sexuality. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind that wants to consume and be consumed. You learned that this makes you shameful, that your body's desires are something to transcend, that true love is pure and spiritual, and certainly not this. But the desire persists. It shows up in the fantasies you won't admit to, in the attraction you feel to exactly what you've been taught to reject, in the deadness you feel in relationships that are appropriate but lack fire. There is the despair you've been outrunning, not sadness, not melancholy, but bottomless, existential despair. The kind that questions whether any of this matters. The kind that sees through every meaning you've constructed and finds it hollow. You've kept moving, kept achieving, kept distracting yourself because stopping means facing the void. But the despair is patient. It waits in every moment of stillness. It colors every achievement with futility. It whispers that nothing you do will ever be enough. And there is the shame, the deep, wordless conviction that something about you is fundamentally wrong. Not that you did something wrong, but that you are wrong. This shame has no specific content. It's older than memory. It's the feeling that if people really saw you, they would recoil. That your existence is somehow an imposition. That you should be less, want less, take up less space. This is your shadow. These are the exiled parts. Now here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Every person you hate is showing you your shadow. Read that again. Let it land. Every quality you judge with particular venom in others. Every weakness you despise, every trait you find intolerable, every behavior that triggers disproportionate contempt. You are looking at your own disowned self in a mirror. The arrogance you cannot stand in others is your suppressed confidence demanding recognition. The neediness you judge is your own unmet need for connection. The weakness you despise is your own vulnerability that you've been taught to hide. The selfishness you condemn is your own healthy self-interest that you've been shaming into silence. This is why your judgments feel so righteous, so justified, so obviously correct. You're not just judging them, you're maintaining the wall between your conscious identity and your shadow. Every judgment is a brick in that wall. Every condemnation is a reinforcement of the division. And the energy this requires is staggering. Think about someone you genuinely dislike. Someone whose very presence irritates you. Bring them to mind right now. Notice what you judge about them. Notice the specific qualities that trigger your contempt. Now ask yourself, what would it mean if those qualities existed in you? Not, do they exist in me? Your ego will immediately say no. But what would it mean if they did? What would you have to acknowledge? What would you have to feel? What identity would you have to release? This is the terror of shadow work. It's not that the shadow contains monsters. It's that the shadow contains you, the parts of you that don't fit the story you've been telling about who you are. The person who prides themselves on being rational and logical discovers they're driven by irrational fears and unexamined emotions. The individual who identifies as compassionate and loving discovers they harbor deep wells of judgment and contempt. The one who sees themselves as strong and independent discovers they're terrified and desperately need support. The spiritual seeker discovers they're full of ego and hungry for recognition. These discoveries feel like death because they are death, the death of the false self, the death of the persona, the death of the carefully constructed identity that has been running your life. But here's the paradox that Jung spent his life exploring. The very qualities you rejected often contain your greatest power. The rage you suppress doesn't just contain destructive force. It contains your capacity for necessary boundaries, your ability to say no, your refusal to be exploited. Without access to your anger, you become a doormat. You let others violate your limits. You sacrifice yourself on the altar of being nice, while resentment poisons you from within. The greed you shame doesn't just contain selfishness. It contains your will to thrive, your refusal to settle for scraps, your healthy ambition to create and build and expand. Without access to your hunger, you become passive. You wait for permission. You make yourself small and call it humility. The lust you hid doesn't just contain base desire. It contains your life force, your passion, your connection to the raw vitality of being alive. Without access to your sexuality, you become disembodied. You live in your head. You experience life through concepts rather than through the electric immediacy of sensation. The despair you outran doesn't just contain nihilism. It contains your capacity to see through false meaning, to refuse easy answers, to demand authentic purpose. Without access to your despair, you become naive. You accept shallow explanations. You build your life on foundations you've never questioned. The shame you carry doesn't just contain self-hatred. It contains your sensitivity, your awareness of others, your capacity for genuine humility. Without integrating your shame, you become either grandiose or collapsed, unable to hold the paradox of being both flawed and worthy. This is the shocking revelation. Your wholeness requires the shadow. Not transcending it, not healing it, not transforming it into light, but welcoming it back as an essential part of who you are. The spiritual traditions got this wrong. They taught you to transcend the shadow, to rise above it, to become pure light. But Jung understood something deeper. The goal isn't to eliminate the shadow. The goal is to integrate it, to bring it into consciousness, to stop fighting it and start recognizing it as yourself. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It doesn't mean expressing every dark thought. It means acknowledging that these parts exist, that they're yours, that they contain intelligence and energy and power that you need. The integrated person doesn't lack rage. They have access to their anger and can use it consciously. They don't lack desire. They can feel their hunger without being controlled by it. They don't lack shadow. They've stopped pretending it doesn't exist and started learning from it. So what does integration actually look like? It starts with recognition, with the willingness to see what you've been avoiding, to acknowledge that the qualities you judge most harshly in others exist in you, to admit that the persona you've been maintaining is partial, that there are parts of you that don't fit the story. Then comes the descent, the deliberate turning toward what you've been running from, not with the goal of fixing it or changing it, but simply with the goal of seeing it, of letting it be seen, of saying, yes, this is also me. This is terrifying. Your entire identity has been built on not being these things. Your sense of who you are depends on the division between acceptable and unacceptable, between light and dark, between the self you show and the self you hide. But as you turn toward the shadow, something unexpected happens. The monster you've been fleeing reveals itself to be a part of you that's been trying to get your attention. The rage that seems so destructive reveals itself to be a protector that's been trying to establish boundaries. The greed that seems so shameful reveals itself to be a life force that's been trying to help you thrive. The despair that seems so nihilistic reveals itself to be a truth teller that's been trying to free you from false meaning. The shadow isn't your enemy. It never was. It's been your ally, holding the parts of you that didn't fit, waiting for you to become strong enough to reclaim them. And the energy you've been using to suppress it, the constant vigilance, the exhausting performance, the perpetual monitoring, that energy becomes available for living, for creating, for connecting, for being present to what is rather than managing what appears. This is the invitation. What if, instead of fighting these parts, instead of transcending them, instead of healing them away, you finally let them come home? What if the rage could inform your boundaries without controlling your behavior? What if the hunger could fuel your ambition without becoming addiction? What if the desire could animate your life without becoming compulsion? What if the despair could deepen your wisdom without becoming depression? What if your wholeness isn't waiting in some future achievement or spiritual attainment, but in the simple act of welcoming back what you've been rejecting? The shadow is knocking. It's been knocking your entire life. The anxiety, the depression, the exhaustion, the sense that something is missing, these are the sound of your wholeness trying to break through. The question is, are you ready to open the door? What if, in this moment, you simply stopped? Stopped defending. Stopped managing. Stopped maintaining the elaborate story of who you're supposed to be. Not forever. Not as a permanent state. Just for this breath. This single moment. What if you let the armor fall? Feel what happens in your body when you even consider this. Notice the resistance. The immediate tightening. The voice that says, but if I stop defending myself, I'll be vulnerable. If I stop managing my image, people will see the truth. If I let go of the story, I'll have nothing left. That voice is the ego. And it's terrified, because it knows that what I'm suggesting is its death. Not your death. It's death. There's a difference. A crucial difference that most people never recognize. You are not the ego. You are not the defended self. You are not the story you've been telling. You are the awareness in which all of that appears. Right now, there are thoughts moving through your mind. You can notice them. Is this true? What does this mean? Where is this going? Thoughts arising, thoughts dissolving. But if you can notice the thoughts, you cannot be the thoughts. You are the space in which thinking happens. Right now, there are emotions moving through your body. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps resistance. Perhaps fear. Emotions arising, emotions shifting. But if you can notice the emotions, you cannot be the emotions. You are the space in which feeling happens. Right now, there is a sense of being someone, a person with a history, with problems, with an identity. But if you can notice this sense of being someone, you cannot be that someone. You are the awareness that witnesses even the sense of self. This is what the mystics have been pointing to. What Eckhart Tolle calls presence. What Buddhism calls the witness. What Jung called the self with a capital S. The awareness that contains both ego and shadow, both light and dark, both the persona and what lies beneath. And here's what's shocking. This awareness has been here the entire time. It was here before you developed an ego. It was here before you learned language. It was here before you constructed a persona. It's been here, unchanging, witnessing everything. The adaptation, the rejection, the shadow formation, the exhaustion, the seeking. All of it has been appearing in this awareness like clouds passing through sky. You are the sky, not the clouds. The sky. The clouds are the thoughts, the emotions, the stories, the identities. They come and go. They form and dissolve. They seem so solid, so real, so important. But they're temporary. They're weather patterns moving through the vastness of what you actually are. And the ego, the defended self, the constructed identity, the one who's been trying so hard to maintain the performance, it's just another cloud. A particularly persistent cloud. A cloud that believes it's the sky. But still just a cloud. What happens when you recognize this? The boundaries begin to soften. Not as pathology, not as dissolution into chaos, but as a return to what's always been true. Like ice finally remembering its water. Like a wave recognizing its ocean. The sense of being a separate self, isolated, defended, struggling against the world, begins to reveal itself as a construction. Not a lie exactly, but not the whole truth either. A useful fiction that you mistook for reality. And as this recognition deepens, something extraordinary happens. The things you've been fighting stop being threats. The shadow isn't dangerous anymore, because you recognize it as another cloud passing through the sky of your awareness. The rage, the greed, the lust, the despair, they're not you. But they're also not other than you. They're movements of energy arising in consciousness, no more threatening than a storm is threatening to the sky itself. The sky doesn't fight the storm. It allows it. It holds it. It remains unchanged by it. This is ego death. Not the dramatic, psychedelic dissolution that people fear, but the quiet recognition that what you thought you were, the defended separate self, was never the whole story. And with this recognition comes a relief, so profound it can feel like grief. All that effort, all that vigilance, all that energy spent maintaining the performance, managing the image, defending the boundaries of a self that was never as solid as you believed. It was like spending your life guarding a fortress made of mist. The exhaustion you've been carrying wasn't from living. It was from pretending, from maintaining the fiction of separation, from defending against what was never actually separate from you. Let yourself feel this for a moment. The relief of not having to be someone. The spaciousness of not having to defend an identity. The freedom of recognizing that you are the awareness in which all of this appears, not the content that appears within it. Your breath moves. The heart beats. Sensations arise and dissolve. Thoughts come and go. Emotions flow through like weather. And beneath it all, prior to it all, there is this, the simple fact of being aware. The presence that has never left. The consciousness that has been here all along, witnessing everything, unchanged by anything. This is what you are. Not the story. Not the persona. Not even the shadow. But the awareness that holds all of it without being defined by any of it. And from this recognition, something shifts in how you relate to everything. The shadow is no longer something to integrate in the sense of fixing or healing. It's simply another aspect of the human experience arising in consciousness. You can acknowledge it, learn from it, even express it consciously, without identifying with it. Without believing that having rage makes you a rageful person. Without believing that feeling greed makes you a greedy person. You are the space in which rage can arise without becoming rage. The awareness in which greed can appear without becoming greed. The consciousness in which all human experience unfolds without being limited to any particular experience. This is freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from being imprisoned by what you are. For just an instant, let yourself rest here. In the space before thought. In the awareness before identity. In the presence that has no name, no story, no defense. You are both infinitely small and infinitely large. Both nothing and everything. Both the individual wave and the entire ocean. Both the temporary form and the eternal formless. This is the peak moment. The recognition that mystics spend lifetimes seeking. Not as a permanent state, that's another trap of the ego, wanting to achieve enlightenment and make it an identity. But as a glimpse, a remembering, a coming home to what you've always been. And then the return. Because you're not meant to stay in the formless. You're not meant to transcend the human experience. You're here, in a body, in time, in the world of form. The point isn't to escape this. The point is to recognize what you are while living as who you are. The breath returns to normal rhythm. The sense of being a person returns. The thoughts resume their movement. The emotions continue their flow. But something has shifted. There's a knowing now, underneath everything. A recognition that can't be unfelt. You are not just the person. You are also the awareness of the person. You are both the wave and the ocean. Both the cloud and the sky, both the form and the formless. And from this recognition, you can finally live differently. Not because you've transcended your humanity. Not because you've eliminated your shadow. Not because you've perfected your persona. But because you've recognized that none of it defines you. You are the space in which all of it appears. The rage can arise without controlling you. The fear can appear without paralyzing you. The desire can flow without consuming you. The despair can visit without destroying you. Because you know yourself as the awareness that holds all of it, not the content that appears within it. This is integration. Not the integration of shadow into ego, but the recognition that both shadow and ego appear in something larger, the awareness that you actually are. And this awareness is already whole. It's never been broken. It's never needed fixing. It's been here all along, patiently witnessing your struggle to become what you already are. The body breathes. The heart beats. Sensations move through like waves. You are here. You have always been here. Not the defended self. Not the constructed identity. But this, the simple, undeniable fact of being aware. And from this place, everything becomes workable. The shadow isn't a problem to solve. The ego isn't an enemy to defeat. The persona isn't a lie to expose. They're all just movements of energy arising in the vast space of what you are. You can work with them, learn from them, express them consciously, without being imprisoned by them, without believing that any of them are the whole truth of who you are. This is the freedom that Jung was pointing toward. Not the freedom from having a shadow, but the freedom from being identified with either the persona or the shadow. The freedom of recognizing yourself as the awareness that holds both. And in this recognition, the exhaustion finally lifts. Not because you've solved all your problems, not because you've healed all your wounds, but because you've stopped fighting yourself. You've stopped trying to be someone other than what you are. You've stopped defending against what was never actually separate from you. You are the sky. The clouds will continue to pass. Some dark, some light. Some comfortable, some disturbing. But you are not the clouds. You are the vast, unchanging space in which all weather appears. And from this recognition you can finally rest. But you don't get to stay in the clouds. This is what the spiritual seekers miss. They have the peak experience, the recognition of vast awareness, the dissolution of the separate self, the moment of unity, and then they spend the rest of their lives trying to get back there, trying to maintain the state, trying to live as pure consciousness. And in doing so, they create a new persona, the enlightened one, the awakened one, the one who has transcended, which is just another mask, another construction, another way of avoiding the messy, complicated, fully human experience of being alive. Jung understood this. He called it the transcendent function, not transcendence as escape, but transcendence as the ability to hold opposites, to be both human and aware of being human, to have an ego and know you're not just the ego, to experience shadow and recognize it as part of the whole. This is the real work, not the peak experience, but what you do with it when you return to ordinary life. Because you will return. You must return. The bills still need to be paid. The relationships still need tending. The body still needs feeding. The work still needs doing. You're not meant to float in formless awareness. You're meant to bring that awareness into form. And this is where everything you've recognized becomes practical. You're in a conversation, and you feel rage rising. In the past, you would have either suppressed it, swallowed it down, smiled through it, let it crystallize into resentment, or been controlled by it, erupting in ways you'd later regret. But now there's a third option. You feel the rage. You recognize it as energy arising in awareness. You don't identify with it. You're not a rageful person. But you don't suppress it either. It's not wrong or bad. It's information. It's telling you something about a boundary that's been violated, a need that's not being met, a truth that needs speaking. And from the space of awareness, you can choose how to respond. Maybe you speak directly. What you just said doesn't work for me. Maybe you remove yourself from the situation. Maybe you recognize that the rage is disproportionate, that it's old rage, shadow rage, rage that belongs to a younger version of you, and you can acknowledge it internally without acting on it externally. This is conscious relationship with the shadow. Not suppression, not expression, but recognition and choice. You notice yourself judging someone harshly. In the past, you would have either believed the judgment, convinced yourself it was objective truth, that they really are that way, or suppressed it, tried to be more compassionate, forced yourself to think positive thoughts. But now you recognize the judgment as a mirror, as your shadow showing you something about yourself. And instead of fighting it or believing it, you get curious. What am I seeing in them that I've rejected in myself? What quality am I judging that I'm not allowing in my own experience? And often the answer is immediate. You're judging their arrogance because you've suppressed your own confidence. You're judging their neediness because you've denied your own need for connection. You're judging their weakness because you've been forcing yourself to be strong. The judgment doesn't disappear, but it stops being about them and becomes information about you, about what you've exiled, about what's trying to come home. You're pursuing a goal, a project, a relationship, a creative endeavor, and you notice the familiar pattern of self-sabotage. The way you get close to success and then somehow undermine yourself. The way you create obstacles. The way you snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. In the past, you would have judged this as weakness, as failure, as evidence that something is wrong with you. Or you would have pushed through it with willpower, forced yourself to succeed, created more pressure and more exhaustion. But now you recognize this as shadow material, as a part of you that's afraid of visibility, of success, of being seen. Maybe it's the shame that says you don't deserve good things. Maybe it's the fear that success will bring rejection. Maybe it's the belief that staying small keeps you safe. And instead of fighting this part or forcing it into submission, you can dialogue with it. You can acknowledge its fear. You can understand its protective function. You can thank it for trying to keep you safe, even as you choose to move forward anyway. This is integration. Not eliminating the resistant part, but including it in your awareness, understanding its logic, and making conscious choices that honor both the fear and the desire to grow. This is what living as an integrated human looks like. Not perfect, not transcendent, not free from shadow, but conscious, aware, able to hold the complexity of being both light and dark, both ego and awareness, both human and something larger than human. You still have preferences. You still have opinions. You still have an identity, but you hold it lightly. You know it's not the whole truth. You can play the role without being imprisoned by it. You still have shadow. You still have rage, greed, lust, despair, shame. But you're not controlled by them. You're not suppressing them. You're in relationship with them. You can feel them, learn from them, even express them consciously, without being defined by them. You still have an ego. You still have a sense of being a separate self. But you know it's not the whole story. You can function as an individual while recognizing your connection to everything. You can have boundaries while knowing that the boundaries are permeable, provisional, not ultimately real. This is the paradox of integration. You become more fully human by recognizing you're not just human. You become more authentically yourself by recognizing there's no fixed self. You become more whole by acknowledging your brokenness. And from this place, something remarkable happens. You stop needing to be special. The spiritual ego, the one that wants to be enlightened, awakened, more conscious than others, that dissolves. Because you recognize that awareness is not an achievement. It's what you are. It's what everyone is, whether they recognize it or not. You're not better than anyone for having done this work. You're not more evolved. You're not superior. You're simply more conscious of what was always true. And that consciousness doesn't make you special. It makes you ordinary in the most profound sense. You're just a human being, with all the complexity that entails. Light and shadow, ego and awareness, form and formless, and so is everyone else. This recognition changes how you move through the world. You stop trying to fix people. You stop trying to save them. You stop trying to convince them to see what you see. Because you recognize that everyone is on their own journey, working with their own shadow, discovering their own awareness in their own time. You can offer what you've learned. You can share your experience. You can hold space for others' process. But you're not attached to their transformation. You're not invested in their awakening. You recognize that their path is theirs, not yours. And paradoxically, this makes you more helpful. Because you're not coming from ego, from the need to be the one who helps, the one who knows, the one who saves. You're coming from presence, from genuine availability, from the recognition that we're all in this together, all working with the same fundamental human predicament. You also stop waiting for your life to begin. This is crucial. The ego is always oriented toward the future. When I heal this wound, then I'll be ready. When I integrate this shadow, then I'll be whole. When I achieve this goal, then I'll be happy. When I reach enlightenment, then I'll be free. But from the recognition of awareness, you see that life is already happening. This moment is already it. You're already whole, even with your wounds. You're already free, even with your conditioning. You're already home, even while you're still growing. The work continues. The integration deepens. The shadow reveals new layers. But you're not doing it to become someone. You're doing it because it's the natural unfolding of consciousness becoming aware of itself. You're not trying to get somewhere. You're exploring what's already here. And this changes everything about how you relate to difficulty. When challenges arise, and they will constantly, you don't experience them as evidence that you're failing or that you haven't done enough work. You experience them as the texture of being alive, as opportunities for deeper recognition, as invitations to bring awareness to places that have been unconscious. The relationship that triggers all your attachment wounds isn't a problem to solve. It's a mirror showing you what still needs integration. The work situation that activates your rage isn't evidence that you're broken. It's information about boundaries that need establishing. The depression that visits isn't a sign that you've regressed. It's a messenger asking you to slow down, to feel what you've been avoiding, to honor the grief that needs expression. Nothing is pathology. Everything is information. Every experience is an opportunity for consciousness to know itself more fully. This doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you stop taking action or making changes. But the action comes from a different place. Not from the ego trying to fix itself, but from awareness responding to what's needed. You leave the relationship that's genuinely harmful, not because you're running from your shadow, but because you recognize it's not serving your growth. You establish boundaries at work, not because you're being defensive, but because you're honoring your limits. You seek support for depression, not because you're broken, but because you're caring for yourself with the same compassion you'd offer anyone who's suffering. The actions might look the same from the outside, but the internal experience is completely different. There's no war, no struggle, no sense that you're fighting against yourself or reality. Just clear seeing and appropriate response. And gradually, over time, something shifts in the quality of your presence. You become less reactive. Not because you've suppressed your reactions, but because you're not identified with them. The emotion arises, you feel it fully, and it passes. You don't need to act on every impulse or suppress every uncomfortable feeling. You can simply be with what is. You become more authentic, not because you're expressing every thought and feeling, but because you're not hiding. You're not performing. You're not maintaining a persona. You're simply present as you are, with all your complexity, without apology and without defense. You become more compassionate, not as a moral achievement, but as a natural result of recognizing yourself in everyone. When you've met your own shadow, you can't judge others for theirs. When you've seen your own darkness, you can hold space for theirs. When you've recognized your own humanity, you can honor theirs. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming special or unique, but becoming whole. Integrating what was split. Bringing consciousness to what was unconscious. Recognizing yourself as both the particular individual and the universal human. Both the wave and the ocean. And this process doesn't end. There's no final arrival. No permanent enlightenment. No state where you've integrated everything and can rest in perfect wholeness forever. There are always deeper layers. Always new shadows emerging. Always more subtle identifications to recognize and release. The work continues as long as you're alive. But it's no longer work in the sense of struggle. It's exploration. It's discovery. It's the adventure of consciousness knowing itself. So where does this leave you? Right here. Right now. In this moment. In this body. In this life. With all its complexity, all its challenges, all its beauty and difficulty and ordinariness. You're not transcendent. You're not enlightened. You're not beyond the human experience. You're fully in it. But you're in it differently. With awareness. With presence. With the recognition that you are both the experiencer and the experience, both the observer and the observed, both the individual and the infinite. And from this place you can finally live. Not the life you think you should live. Not the life that would make you acceptable or successful or spiritual. But the life that's actually yours. The one that includes your shadow. The one that honors your humanity. The one that recognizes your divinity without making it an identity. This is the invitation. Not to become someone else, but to recognize who you've always been beneath the performance, beneath the persona, beneath the carefully constructed story. You are the awareness in which all of this appears. You are the space that holds both light and shadow. You are the consciousness that has been here all along, witnessing everything, unchanged by anything, patiently waiting for you to recognize it. And now you have. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Enough to begin living differently. Enough to stop fighting yourself. Enough to welcome home what you've been rejecting. The shadow is no longer your enemy. The ego is no longer your prison. The persona is no longer your cage. They're all just aspects of the human experience, arising in the vast awareness that you are. Welcome home. Your breath continues. In, out. The same rhythm that was here at the beginning. But something has shifted. Not in the breath. In your relationship to it. In your recognition of what's breathing. What you've encountered here isn't new information. It's not a technique to practice or a concept to understand. It's a recognition of what's always been true. You are not who you thought you were. You are both less than you imagined, not the special, separate self, and infinitely more, the awareness in which all experience appears. The shadow work isn't about eliminating darkness. It's about recognizing that the darkness is yours, that it contains power and intelligence, that your wholeness depends on welcoming it back. The ego dissolution isn't about destroying the self. It's about recognizing that the self you've been defending was never as solid as you believed. And the integration isn't a destination. It's a way of being. A way of moving through life with awareness instead of automaticity. With presence instead of performance. With wholeness instead of fragmentation. This channel exists for those willing to do this work. Not the comfortable work of self-improvement, but the uncomfortable work of self-recognition. Not the work of becoming better, but the work of becoming whole. If what you've heard today resonates, if something in you says, yes, this is what I've been looking for, then subscribe. Not to collect content, but to continue the exploration. Each video is an invitation to go deeper, to see more clearly, to recognize more fully what you are beneath the story. And if you're ready to go even further, there are resources in the description. Books that map this territory, practices that support the recognition, communities of others doing this work. But remember, the work isn't out there. It's not in the next video or the next book or the next insight. It's here, in this moment, in your willingness to see what you've been avoiding, in your courage to welcome back what you've been rejecting, in your recognition of what you've always been. The shadow is calling. The awareness is waiting. Your wholeness is here. The only question is, are you ready to stop performing and start recognizing?